Welcome back. Hope you're doing well. Part two of this chapter 8 discussion. Okay, so just we spent the first part of this presentation talking about identity and identity development and this process of crisis and commitment, right? That you're kind of seeing depicted in this other image. All right, see you on the next slide. All right, let's get back into it. Good to see you. Man, it's like a term like parental monitoring. It's like it means it has such a different meaning when you have kids, and it's like you realize it's your fear for them, sort of. It makes you a little bit more patient towards your memories of your own parents, where it's like it's kind of scary having like the your child becoming a person, and going out in the world and taking risks. And in adolescence, there's typically this pretty significant change in the parent-child relationship, and it's like my kids are already their own kids, but at 7 and at 2, it's like really weird for me to imagine like that those late teenage years when they're at that stage. But I would say it like this: the same when my 2-year-old's climbing up the stairs, and I don't want her to fall, and I'm like, it's so hard not to have my hands literally touching her back. And I have to keep myself back a little bit, and then less and less and less, and let her be independent. And it's like it's that the same spirit or energy that is related to the monitoring behavior later, right? It's like, okay, well, what happens when now that child that you still care about, that you still are focused on protecting, is older and wants to be independent? And it's like it's a difficult transition often for both. So I say a key aspect of the managerial role of parenting is this effective monitoring. And it's like, what does even monitoring mean in nowadays? It's like we could go on for an hour about what that means just in relation to technology. But that at the core, it's like the more involved you are in your child's life, the more chance you have to help them shape as healthy of a relationship to their world as possible. It's like, and then, okay, so the point here is that like most parents would love to be able to keep up with it's like you have this weird scenario. So I tried to give that rant I gave right there, that little talk I gave, to kind of give the emotion or the spirit of, and say that this is sort of the same thing but just at an older age group, where if you wanted to like if you wanted to say, okay, maybe your parents aren't just Snoopy, if you wanted to look at it in the best possible light, maybe it's that same impulse that's me wanting to protect my kid. And maybe you're saying, yeah, but I'm an adult and I'm my own person. It's like, yeah, but to your parent, you're the kid. Evie wants to be her own person. I still want to protect her. It's like that's going to be even more complicated. It's like, check the PowerPoint. If who knows, if I'm going to be even a teacher, who knows, whatever. But like, if I am in the future, it's like, you'll check my tune once I have teenagers myself, maybe. But I think the key is, or at least what I think my goal is to keep the communication channel as open as possible. And but again, it's this struggle towards independence, right? And so parents have sort of, sometimes it's like through talking and hopefully through soliciting answers. That's basically like through asking them about stuff, or through like also sometimes having rules, right? Like at a kid example, it's like my kid is allowed to watch YouTube, but kids YouTube, and she's allowed to use my old phone sometimes, but it's in Samsung Kids mode, which is like highly curated. It's like she can access some apps, she can take pictures and videos, but she can't send them, she can't receive them. It's like it's a smart. Samsung Kids is actually pretty impressive and pretty smart. And now one of you will probably tell me that there's some problem with it, which there might be, but I don't know. I've been pretty impressed by it. But that would be an example of like that, or like, and that same thing is sort of like, you know, you need to tell me who's driving to the party tonight. Like I want to kind of know who's there. Just like I want to know who's there on my kid's phone. It's like literally the same impulse, actually. And when parents aren't successful with that, then it's usually when, you know, you hear teenagers will say the most annoying thing is when parents are snoopy, and you'll hear parents say that if they're being honest, they hate being snoopy, they don't like being like that, but they get desperate when they're worried. And whether it's justified or not, it's like there's a connection between desperation and snoopiness. If that makes sense, that was a weird thing to say, but like the more of number one, especially like the more there's communication, the less of the need to do things like, you know, whatever be you know what I mean by the word snoopy. Okay, next. Like using this is just like an image from, I think this image is actually from the textbook, but you see this girl's face, right? It just looks like almost laughed. That looks like almost like my daughter when she's upset, right? You can see the parent in the background. You can kind of read into it and being like maybe the mom's like trying to tell her she can't go to some party that she doesn't think she's old enough for yet, but the daughter thinks she should, and mom's not being fair. A tale as old as time. This typical adolescent push for autonomy and responsibility, you know, is puzzling and angering to parents, and it's because again, it's that same dynamic I was mentioning about like wanting them to be their own person, but also it being difficult to like let go in certain areas, and it's difficult to balance like being a good parent with not overparenting, and so like so yeah, it's puzzling, you know, but it's interesting to note some of these points. Like, okay, let's put the points all up, but and then I'll rant, and you can like write it down or whatever. In early adolescence, it says there like conflicts with parents tends to escalate, and it's kind of interesting because if you look at the amount of things that you would consider conflictual like interactions, they increase. But it's really interesting because if you can, during periods of calm, if you talk to either teens or parents, they'll still say that core relationship is super important to them. We still know that that's huge in terms of development, like the presence of parents during that time period. So what I'm saying is like the increase in conflict is more due to the increase in life intensity in general than it is to necessarily any kind of breakdown in that relationship. But that's hard to like understand as the parent. As the parent, it's just your kid seems to be mad at you all the time now. And it's like, and it's not like the teenager can articulate the complex things they're feeling going through puberty and being in this complicated social environment and having media manipulation, propaganda aimed straight at them and trying to, you know, figure out who they are in this confusing world. And as people get closer to like 20, it tends to go down a bit. It lessens as adolescents reach closer to, you know, the end of high school. And some of that is because the intensity of puberty dies down a bit, right? Depending on who you are, because obviously, again, puberty, as we've talked about, can manifest in different ways on different times and all that kind of stuff. But like, there tends to be this increase, and actually, how the teen learns to deal with that, and it's like this is going to be difficult, right? It's like this is one of these things where I'm just like admitting right off the start that it's like easy to preach on when I have a 7 and a 2-year-old about how you should parent your teens. I don't have teens. Um, but you know, all the literature would suggest that the more it's like weirdly completely obvious. It's like the better the depth and the quality of the relationship and more you can keep as best as you can some kind of line of communication, that actually you can be a key person in coaching their ability to deal with difficult emotions and difficult social situations. And it's also about, it's not just that, it's also that as a parent you can play a role in shaping their social environment, right? It's like I try with my daughters to make sure they're around their aunts and their other cousins a lot, and like around positive people. And so that's one of the reasons obviously parents then worry when they're teens, or when their kids are like starting to hang out with people that they like worry about. You know, how many times in this presentation have I said the word worry? Right? It's like this struggle between the worry of the parent and the desire for independence of the kid, and both of them, if you see the full perspective of the person, are understandable positions. Another interesting part that I put, that like when families immigrate from another country, one interesting thing that happens is, okay, people basically will learn and customize to the language of a new country, largely dependent on their age and whether they're in school or not. You can just picture it. Picture like a mom and a kid coming from a different country to Canada and not speaking English, and the kid, let's say, is 4, and the mom, let's say, is 40. And let's say the mom is getting some financial support or whatever, and is maybe she's working and she has like some people she interacts with, but that kid's in school every day, and that kid's probably taking ESL classes too, and that kid is likely to pick up English quicker than the parent generation. Right? I say like adolescents typically will acculturate more quickly than parents, and that's even more true with kids. Okay. The importance appears, the idea that during this time of life, like friends, and I probably don't have to explain this to you, but at the time of life that you're in, there's this increased role of peers, right? A lot of your socialization, another way of saying it, a lot of your socialization becomes horizontal. That's another way of saying peer influence, right? That it's not like your parents teaching down to you, it's you kind of horizontally learning with your peer group. And so I see here like peer relations change a lot during adolescence, including changes in how our friendships exist, our peer groups exist, starting to have romantic relationships maybe, right? By grade 8 and 9, this is so interesting, right? That like this transition point between grade school and high school is actually when people are most susceptible to antisocial conformity, right? So if you were to say like, okay, peer pressure is something that affects everybody, but if you were to say who does it statistically affect the most, it's actually people in that kind of grade 8, grade 9, especially beginning of grade 9. Then you think that's actually pretty interesting, because it's almost like when you're younger, when you're like 2, like my daughter. My daughter doesn't care enough about what people think of her. It's like there's something about grade 8 and 9 that you're at that age where you're like smart enough to care and understand. You're not like a developed adult yet, obviously, at grade 9, but it's almost like you're smart enough to get it and not yet mature enough to defend yourself from it. That's where the ability to be affected by your peers is actually statistically the highest. Now, an interesting point is that like peer pressure can often be very positive, right? Like getting your friends together and going and practicing for the sport that you like to play, or like studying together, or even just like hanging out and having like a good time in a healthy way, is like, that's all positive peer pressure. In early adolescence, teenagers typically, prefer smaller numbers of friendships, more intense and intimate than kids, right? Than those of like kids. So this is comparing you to yourself, right? So it's saying statistically, most people as they get older tend to have a smaller knit group of friends than when they were younger. But this is sort of the point of the title of the slide, that the fact that the group is getting smaller doesn't mean that the importance is less, right? Because when we were talking about, this is kind of in relation to almost a throwback to last term when we were saying that how key, remember I went on these like long rants about how one of the issues with the COVID lockdowns was how it interfered so much with social development in kids, and the fact that there's so much mental health issues these days and so much behavioral issues in the schools should surprise no one. It's like the importance of peers in development is gigantic. And I talked a lot about that in relation to like grade school kids, and it's just as true for high school age kids. Or it's just as true for you in college. And maybe it's not just as true though, I shouldn't really say that. It's way more important for young kids. But it's also important we're social creatures. We understand our world largely like through this social lens. I'm getting a bit off point. Okay, good time to switch to the next slide. I'll see you on the next slide. Okay. Yeah, and like just think about this point, right? On that like last rant I went, having friends is a developmental advantage. If you were an alien, I sometimes try to say this is always a weird I said this the other day in class in Kitchener. I said that, and the one student was like, "What? This person's pretty funny." But yeah, I was like, just if an alien came to Earth and was looking at it, and the reason you say that is because that's like the ultimate outsider perspective, right? Like alien is literally a term that means like not from here. And so if an alien comes down to Earth and looks at humans, they'd see that the humans that have close relationships do better than the humans that don't. And that not all types of those relationships are the same, and the quality of those relationships seems to have huge significance developmentally in how well the person develops, right? And some of that development might be physical. It's like people that have friends that play sports on average statistically are better at sports. So it is true, and that's the same as with music. And that's the same with public speaking. So that's like true with like very physical skills. It's also true with things like emotional regulations. It's also true with things like things we would associate as cognitive or even spiritual skills. And it's like there's developmental advantages to being around people that care about you that are also trying to learn and grow. And not all friendships are the same, just like not all relationships are the same, just like not all people are the same. An adolescent is more likely to conform to peers when, now think about this, when they're unsure about themselves and when they're with someone that they think is cool, basically. Right? So you're the most likely to conform, right? And let's say like if you're doing something that you want to do, and say everyone's like, oh, let's go to the party, and you want to go to the party, and you're like, okay, I'll go to the party. That's not really conforming. I guess it's sort of like, it's like by definition conforming, co-forming or conforming. But the conforming, why it's not co-forming and why it's conforming is because there's this, it's a weird way to say it, but because there's this like there's this pressure aspect, there's this cohesion or you're being coerced, that there's a manipulative element, right? So now think about it. You're most likely to be manipulated when you're in a situation where you feel bad about yourself and you're with someone that you think is high status, and they're the one trying to manipulate you. Okay. This is relatively small, might be related to a question. I want you to know that just the difference between cliques and crowds. In the literature, talks a lot about this, and it's as simple as it seems. It's like what the literature really shows is that in teenagers, there's like this tendency, and it's like, even say I have my group of like, I can just see over there a picture of me and like 3 guys that I played soccer with, and it's like that'd kind of be my clique. And then the crowd was like the people we would go and like hang out with on the weekend or whatever. And it's like that this is true in a lot of cultures. In a lot of cultures, you kind of have your friend group, and then the bigger group that you kind of your friend, the kind of the extended family of your friend group, larger than cliques, less personal, usually based, like still in this hierarchical reputation, spend less time together in general. Right, so there's still this like huge pure element. Okay. So this is the Connolly and McIsaac, and they talk about the three stages that characterize romantic relationships, and it's like basically saying that like, okay, well this is like, let's just be blunt about it. This is the time in life when, the how do I say it in a way that's not awkward and make me blush, but just when we start being attracted to people, right? And Connolly and McIsaac say that this sort of goes through stages, and just like every single other thing in developmental psychology, there's going to be people that don't fit this model perfectly, right? It's an average based model. It's a developmental norm based model, saying that like, it's earlier and later for some, but like on average, when people are in this kind of 11, 13 range, whatever romantic feelings they have tend to get heightened quite a bit by the biochemistry of puberty. And that as they get to more like this 14, 16, they, people might start exploring with relationships and, casual dating between individuals who are mutually attracted. I don't know why I feel embarrassed reading that. It's very normal. Dating in groups, right? This idea of like, that you see this a lot, right? If you're just looking at human activity around the world in different cultures, you see that there tends to be this when this like kind of mid-teen idea of like hanging out in friend groups, like bigger friend groups, mixed friend groups, right? And then the kind of dating in pairs tends to pick up, and again, like this is obviously happening earlier and stuff too, but as a statistical average, you tend to see it more once you get towards the 17, 19, the more of these dyactic romantic bonds, just a fancy way of saying two people, more serious relationships, start to see stronger, more stable bonds, more length of average relationships. Remember, these are all like statistical averages. Right? Because developmental psychology, we're not interested in what people should do, or we're interested in what people actually do when we observe them, right? When we measure human development and human behavior. And there's also like increased sensation seeking and risk taking aspect of adolescence often gets talked about as like, oh, it's like risky, blah blah blah. It's like, yeah, but that's also like kind of the awesome part of the time period in life that a lot of you are in, that this is also linked to like exploring and getting out there. And you could probably actually make a very strong evolution based argument that there's a reason that risk taking increases when you're at the age a lot of you are at, is that you're at the time of your life where you're physically able to take more risks. You're maybe a little bit less like kind of social obligation tied up, if especially if you don't have a ton of family commitments, so you maybe can, like, that picture of the person like climbing Everest, like going to the other side of the world and finding finding these experiences. And I'd encourage you to. It's like, I don't know, a lot of these tendencies are ancient reflections. They're based on who we've been for thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. It's like human beings, like, and this idea that adolescence is this period, right? So what I'm saying now is like the reason this is happening, and the reason why like adolescence is what it is. It's like we can't separate your experience of adolescence from the fact that like there's been all these humans before you and their experiences, and the fact that what I was saying there about evolutionary psychology is if you needed to keep, like, for example, let's just be completely realistic. You want to have your most physically capable fighters, most willing to take risks, and you also want your kind of early adults possibly leaving the group to find mates or to find partners, because one of the biggest problems would be like keeping a fresh gene pool. People have been aware of that for a long time. It's like the need to expand the tribe has always been a part of our ancient history. And so like now put those ideas together, maybe that's some of that push to like risk take a bit and find a partner and explore and leave the home, right? I just said like leave the tribe. I'm like saying that's like the root of that drive. Sorry if that was weird. That was not pre-planned, but I think that if you followed me there, I think that'll hold. Okay, so sensation seeking, right? This increased desire to experience novelty and reward, right? Novelty, new things. It often involves risks, and we see risk-taking behavior a lot higher in adolescence. Want to know an interesting thing about this? So if I was to ask you, like, who do you think's a more risky driver? And this is kind of a setup because you know what the topic we're talking about is. But say if I said, like, who do you think's more a risky driver? And instead of it comparing you to someone else, let's say you when you're 20, or no, like you when you're 16, or you when you're 40, who's a more dangerous driver and takes more risks, I mean? And the answer is, it's about the same, unless you have friends in the car. And when you have friends in the car when you're 16, it influences your driving much more than when you're 40. So that's an interesting point, right? It's like, one of the things that is very different is the way that the pressure affects actual behavior, right? Because, or else you would, if that wasn't the case, you would predict that if teens, when they're with their friends, are risky drivers, that they'd also be risky drivers when they're by themselves, and that's just not what the statistics show. Right? And I say it's like ubiquitous, meaning like it seems to, it's not like people are riskier with money, or riskier with sexual experiences, or riskier with, you know, like physically something like that, like jumping over a rock. They're risky kind of just in general. That's what like the ubiquitous means, like in a every type of way imaginable. And it seems to be connected to brain development, right? It's like when you say that the teenager's brain's not fully developed, that's what people love to always say, and it's like kind of true, but the brain's there and everything. It's the myelination, right? It's like if you go back to last term, and I ranted about this, it's like myelination, the most interesting thing that no one seems to talk about the brain is the fact that your brain is built, but then it also, there's this like secondary wiring job, what I told you about, like the protection on the outside of the cord of the axons. It's basically what, when people say that the brain of the teenager is not fully developed, what they mean is that that myelination process isn't fully completed until like roughly 23. And once it's completed, you do see a decrease in risk taking. And it's interesting that the part of the brain that's associated with weighing long-term consequences, like if I do this, then this is going to happen later, as that part gets stronger, our risk taking goes down, which, you know, conceptually makes complete sense, but it's just interesting that that's how it is. So I want to sort of challenge you to see this all as the same issue. The reason bullying is such an issue, and at the risk of sounding like I'm stereotyping too much, like it is like, no, I'm not going to apologize, because it's my want to defend the mental health of young women is coming from an informed place, and from also the fact that I have 2 daughters myself and a lot of students I care about, and you know, I can make my argument why. But then it's also the fact that I'm also very aware of how much social media pressure there is on young teens, and especially around things like body image and how that is different between boys and girls. And the problem becomes that now let's add all these factors together. So the time that you're most susceptible to conformity is this like early high school time. It's also the time when puberty is happening. It's also the time when you're in a completely new charged social environment. It's also the time when you're never in your life gonna care more what other people think of you than that time. It's not like it's not like if I found like some website where it was like, I don't know, I'm gonna make this up, baldteacher.com, and it's just like screenshots of me, my bald head, and everyone's like, look at how round that head is. It's like, it's not like that would make me feel good. It's like that'd be a rough day. If I found baldteacher.com, that'd be a rough afternoon. But it's like, whatever. I don't know. My point is that to someone like even my daughter, but more so like a teenager, I was just trying to kind of be funny there, but it's like to a teenager, that kind of stuff can be devastating because it actually gets super deep. It gets to this like one of your most deep needs to belong. And for human history, being excluded from the group has been incredibly dangerous. In some ways, the most dangerous thing that could happen to you. And in a weird way, that's also the behavioral kind of biochemical reason behind the fear associated with public speaking. It's that you have a natural need to protect yourself from embarrassing yourself in front of the group. And so once you understand that part of the nerves of public speaking is that, and that that's normal, and that you can breathe your way through and present anyways, you become a better public speaker. It's like a lot of the best there's the odd person that just kind of thrives off it and loves it, but like I know a lot of people that speak decently well and still like kind of struggle with the nerves of it because yeah, it's that I got it back. I almost lost that train of thought to the wind, but yeah, I'm basically saying like this idea of that's why you're so like susceptible. It honestly makes me feel a little bit upset, right? It's like I got into psychology and into studying this stuff with the idea that what psychology is supposed to be about is at the most basic level, helping people make their lives better. You're not supposed to learn psychology so you can work for some garbage marketing company and target your products towards people that you're also priming to have more insecure emotions so that you can sell them mascara. I don't know, like I'll sound stupid if I try to name the actual makeup products, but like I'm mad at the psychologists working for those companies. They're sellouts hard, right? And it's like it's actually if I actually take it seriously, it's incredibly frustrating. And if you care about this topic, you should watch a documentary called Hypernormalization. Bullying is devastating, right? It can include, yeah, and threats to the person, right? And again, that's my point, is that can be physical, right? Like obviously the most obvious is like physical bullying, but then it's also reputational bullying, and that can be the most devastating, right? Is like, maybe that girl in the image, who knows what her story is? Maybe she just found out, she's the only one in the class not invited to the party. And it's like that retaliatory, or either you could call it like social aggression through exclusion, is massive, and it's more common at this age with with the girls in the teenagers, right? And it's like And again, I'm speaking more from like things I've read and what I've heard in student papers and stuff, and I feel like I'm not speaking ignorantly of it, that that's what it's like, and even though I didn't experience it. So I hope I talked respectfully on that topic. Hey everyone, never sure how to do this uh, in the most respectful way. I just want to say on the next couple slides, I'm going to be dealing with some I'm going to be talking about, mental health, and I'm going to bring up the issue of suicide, and I want to just sort of give a little heads up, right? And because of the profound intensity of the topic, I also want to welcome you if you want to fast forward the presentation until you see a slide that has an image and it says locus of control. And if you wanted to just go to that slide, then it'd be past the part. All right, back to the presentation. Thank you. Okay, so, and again, it's like this feeds directly into what I was just going on that rant about. And I hope, like, I could see how if you're one of my students, like, you're sitting there, you're taking notes, the rant sometimes, or I'll even sort of lose my point and reconnect with the rant, but it's like, I think that's me, that's the best I do, right? Is like, what I try to do is set up the presentation and then sort of talk about the points. And it's interesting how it works, I think, because especially since this is kind of like talking about the layers of mind, right? It's like, because I've taught you and I can picture your class and uh, I know how you responded to the stuff last year, right? And it's like, and I also know, like, I also know that I don't know so much about your actual lives. And, like, every single, well, a lot of these points are upsetting. Like, okay, so now and I want to make this point that I'm trying to show. Do you know the term perfect storm? It has to do with like, there was a movie called The Perfect Storm, and it doesn't mean good. I forget what, because The Perfect Storm was this movie about, it was related to like a boat, a ship, and a perfect storm is when it's like a mixture of the air and the temperature of the water and the direction of stuff, and it's like, and so when I say it's almost like a perfect storm, it's like all those things I was talking about. This fact that, and all these aren't just like my opinion, right? Like, these are all like, well, we know from studying this that like females tend to internalize their emotions more. Remember, we're talking about during the adolescent time period. So, which is why like you tend to see higher rates of things like anxiety. And the flip of that for males is you tend to see higher uses of substances. So people are dealing with complex emotions, and it's all trying to deal with complex emotions and life in a way. It's like there's this internalizing of emotions. Like, even again, it's like there's a risk for you as a smart person to not see what the words actually say. You've heard the word internalize before, so it doesn't seem powerful to you, maybe. But think about it, like, just let your mind maybe relax and be like, okay, what does it mean to have someone make me feel a way, and then that way I feel go inside me and actually shape how I see myself? And now that's part of me. It's like a spell. There's this like increased rumination over and over and over and over and over and over. And that amplifies depression. All right, so what I'm saying here is it's depressed thinking is repetitive. There's actually what's called a poverty of thought, which means when you're in a depressed state, you have a poverty of thought. It doesn't mean you're not smart because it's not compared to anybody else, it's compared to yourself. It means your sort of range of creative thinking is higher when you're not depressed than when you're depressed. Again, not compared to anyone else, compared to yourself. And it's like, man, amplifies. Think of that word. It's like this tendency to internalize the emotion, ruminate on it, that amplifies depression. You could put slash anxiety. Females, the self-image, especially body image, tends to be more negative. Again, refer to the textbook please for like the points on this, and if anyone wants like stats on any of this, it's not like I have stats that are just on a list right here, but it's like in developmental psychology, just to say one last time, we study huge groups of people and we look for averages, and it's like, this is self-report data. This is largely self-report data, right? People answering surveys about themselves. And so now, okay, all these things, right? The perfect storm. It's like the body image being more negative, caring more, being going through puberty a bit earlier, having so much of the marketing world aimed at you as a consumer, because that's one of the most purchasing consumer groups in the world. It's like almost marketing 101, which again, it's like that's where my frustration from a slide ago comes from. But you can't act like that's not all part of the mental health thing. It's not, these girls aren't weird. It's, yeah. Okay. There's a definite advantage to PowerPoint that you get a second between slides to recompose, because it's like, I didn't mean to get like emotional almost in that slide, but it's, in a way, it's like the issue of our time. It's, and then all like this crisis around suicide, very rare in childhood, except in incredibly sad stories and situations. It escalates in adolescence and is at its highest in early adulthood. And it's one of these topics that's super tough to talk about, and it's almost so serious that you want to avoid it as a topic, but at the same time, it's one of the hardest to understand aspects of humans, you know? Second leading cause of death in 10 to 19-year-olds in Canada. You know, I don't need to read the whole slide. You guys can read the slide. It's like, people need connection. People need each other so much. Have It's interesting. It's like these topics are kind of, in a way, especially when I'm kind of doing presentations on the chapters, they're sort of laid out, right? And even though I've crafted these presentations, it's like, again, when you're talking about real topics, and it's like you students are more than just like it's different. I know who the audience is, or not, I know who the students are, and so it's complicated. And if you've dealt with it and you need help, you need to reach out, and if anyone needs help reaching out, I would encourage them to reach out to me, and I will find you links in your area. And sometimes it's about supporting people that you're supporting with like this kind of topic, right? All right. Based on the things I've been talking about over the last little bit, it's like, in a way, there's no better topic to follow all that up with than this idea of locus of control. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about, and it's, in a way, one of the most fundamental mental health principles, and an example of the type of thing I want to focus on quite a bit in a course like this, especially when we get into some of the other topics around, like, I don't know, building things like psychological resilience and mental strength. And it's like, okay, well, what does locus of control mean? It's like, okay, well, locus is just I don't know. Whoever came up with this concept was trying to sound fancy. They could have just said the location of the control, right? Locus, you could write in your notes, equals location. Where's the location of the control? What's controlling your life? Is it, sorry, I also got all amped up. What's controlling your life? Is it like you? Is it, do you control your destiny, or are you a result of your environment? And like we all are to an extent, and it's like, but and sometimes people are have scenarios where they've been traumatized and victimized, and people, and there's evil, and the point is, this is a fundamental variable, though. It's not saying that, okay, this is what it's saying. Even if you're in the worst position imaginable, thinking that you have no power and no control is the worst potential mindset you could have if you ever wanted to somehow get out of that situation. It's so fundamental to performance. It's like there's scales, right? There's like locus of control scales. It's not, you're not one or the other. And I sort of I got this picture off the internet, and then I used like PowerPoint or whatever to just make that like two-sided arrow, and to kind of show this idea that it's like a spectrum, right? I wanted to just add the idea that it's kind of like a spectrum. You're not one or the other. And how confident you are, it's like you even shift on this, right? It's like if you were just completely honest and you filled out like a locus of control questionnaire when you're at your absolute worst mood and maybe really anxious about stuff, you would be viewing things from a more external locus of control than when you're in a calm, confident state. So what I'm trying to say is it fluctuates even within the individual based on situation and mood and confidence and social support and all kinds of variables. But it's so important because it's so directly related to performance. It's so directly related to how you behave, because if you don't think you have any power to change the situation, why would you even try? Why would you dedicate resources towards that? Right? And as soon as the person accepts that position of learned helplessness, then things fall apart very fast. Okay, so let's keep going on this topic for a bit. I hope you kind of. So I like to sometimes think that if you can explain the concept as simply as possible, that's like the best way to approach it. Like, I could obviously find like really complicated definitions of everything, but like, I think what I care the most about is that you kind of get the fascination of psychology. This is actually really important to know. It's really important to know that they've done a lot of research on how mindset is related to performance. right? Obviously, we all know that. You would all, if I asked you, do you think that your mindset is related to how good you do at things? You'd all be like, yeah, obviously, but it's so much more real, right? It's very measurable, is my point. It's very clear that people that score high on external locus of control tend to have like much more tendency towards procrastination, much lower academic performance in general, lower turn-in of assignment rates, tends to be associated with low self-esteem. The introversion connection is interesting, and we can go talk about that in a sec. It tends to be associated with neuroticism, or the tendency towards um, negative emotion, is associated with avoidance, right? Because if you didn't think that you could control situations, if you learn that you're helpless, it actually makes complete sense that you would avoid situations that demanded not being helpless, being brave, right? And just, you'll remember me maybe saying this in the first term, but it's like, that's what I tell my daughter every day when she goes to school. I say, what do I say? Be nice, brave, be kind. Yeah. No, no, no. Have fun, brave, kind. Sometimes switch it up, but I always say, yeah, basically, be, have fun, be brave, and be kind. And then she always rolls her eyes, right? But I know sometimes mess it up or whatever, but I always use to me, the most important word in raising my daughter is the word brave. Because it's like, it's courage in the face of uncertainty almost, or it's like, the word brave kind of implies that it's not super easy for you, right? Like, you don't have to be brave for things that are easy. So anyways, it's like, just like people can learn to be helpless, they can learn to be more brave. They can learn to be, the person that coined the term learned helplessness, Martin Seligman, probably the most famous positive psychologist who we'll talk about in this course, had this concept of learned helplessness, which I'm going to be getting into soon with you. But it's basically the idea that people can learn that they are helpless. They can learn by repeated failures that they can't do things, or that they're in situations where there's no escape, and that can be actually become a mentality. And I'm just kind of lately doing it because I don't want to like just freestyle spoil my whole next, well, it's not the very next, but my upcoming presentation. But like, the point is that we can like learn that we're helpless through this complicated process of repeated failures and how it affects our evaluation of ourselves. But the idea is that you can also learn to be more optimistic. And it's like a real optimism. It's not like some kind of naive, like, oh, I'm just going to pretend everything's good even though I know it's not. It's like, no, it's a brave optimism. Even if you just think of that word combo for a bit and reflect on it, sit out, have a coffee, and just think of, this is, I don't know, I'm freestyling this, but it's like, sit down by yourself someday and just think of what brave optimism would mean towards your life. Okay. Next slide. I don't know where I was going with that, but that came from somewhere. Let's see where, one or two more slides here. So again, I think this is why I want to really stress this spectrum idea, because, and by spectrum idea, I mean, let's say somebody that is completely external locus of control. Let's say that we scored that as like a 0, and then 100 is somebody that's exactly like completely internal. When I say it's a spectrum, I mean it's like a spectrum of scores. It's like on a scale, right? So that you'd be somewhere on there. And then I was making the point that based on your like confidence, and even based on your like recent sleep and how stressed you feel, scores differ, but in general there's consistency, right? So it's like you would have a base score, is what the word that you'd use in statistics would be. So your base score is like your average score, right? And then your base score gets up or down a bit, gets sometimes influenced by, like, say, your mood or your sleep or whatever. It's like, so it's like you're a certain amount of temper, but maybe when you're tired you have a little bit more temper, and when you're well rested you maybe have a little bit less temper, but it only goes up and down so much. It's like that'd be the range around your baseline. That doesn't necessarily matter, but baseline, same thing. So people that have a higher baseline of an internal locus of control, well, you could see, like, okay, say that person's in just the same situation, but they think that, you know, maybe things have happened that weren't their fault. Maybe bad things happened, and maybe evil things. And it's like, it's not saying that that's not real, but it's saying that the strongest mental health thing is to find even the smallest thing you can control and grab onto that and start building towards a healthier self, and start building towards more healthy behavior. Because what starts to happen when you start having more healthy habits and behaviors, you see yourself doing that, and you see yourself maybe even, you know, experiencing successes. And like, nothing has a more direct effect on self-esteem than experiencing successes. It's like, and successes might be small things. You know, you might be in a kind of bad mood, and all of a sudden you're like trying to be in a better mood, and you go to the store and you say to the cashier or something, you make some kind of joke, and they laugh, and all of a sudden you walk outside and you're like, I just shared a laugh with a random person. That was actually a kind of nice piece of being a human. It's like you start to, and then all of a sudden maybe you're a little bit more confident the next time. It's like, just like things can spiral down, they can spiral up, right? And that's my point. Things can spiral up. And if you think that you have an ability to affect your life, you could see how the logical argument would lead to, you're therefore going to be more likely to do things specifically focused, right? Like, it's the opposite of what I said before. If you don't believe that what you do matters, then why would you try? But if you do believe that what you do matters, you could see how you'd be incentivized to try. You know, you're more likely to believe that things like how hard you work and how good you get at things are what's responsible for your outcomes, right? Even in an unfair world. To the degree to which you can control it, how you approach it matters. Right? People that score high in an internal locus of control are more likely to complete tasks and do well at school, more likely to have an optimistic outlook in general, right? Like, and again, someone with differences in this area could be in the exact same life situations. So it's an intriguing concept in psychology that's basically saying that your mental health is highly linked to your locus of control. It's one of the most the more we can help people build their belief in their ability to pull themselves up, the closer we get to what I would say is like the actual heart of what psychology is, or essence of what it's supposed to be. That actually is what, therapeutic psychology, I guess. But yeah, because then all of a sudden, if your beliefs are that you're terrible, then you'll act as if as how you think a terrible person acts, right? And if your beliefs are that, even in a rough situation, you can do it if you work hard enough, you'll act like somebody who, even in difficult situations, works hard and does their best. And you'll start to see that, like, this sounds like too much, but like the world responds to that. The world will respond to that big time. And this is a heavy slide, but it's an important point. And this is sort of what I was saying, is this perfect storm when there's this belief that it's learned helplessness that's associated with this external locus of control, this low self-esteem, this tendency towards introversion, and introversion can also be healthy, but it tends to also be linked with introversion and this increased negative emotion, that's linked with some of the most difficult emotional experiences. And that's just another way of saying that, like, perfect storm thing I was saying earlier. And then It all sort of plays in. And you can see how if you had a low self view of yourself and you had a belief that what you didn't really matter. I say that's related with neuroticism, like no kidding. Like the word neuroticism is sort of dated, and now sometimes people use the term emotional stability instead, but it means the same thing. And it's because in normal culture people use the word wrong, but neuroticism historically in terms of big five personality typology has meant how much negative emotion does the person experience? Like basically, how much does the person worry and get upset about stuff? And of course, if you, it seems completely obvious in a way that those things would be related, right? And it's like, it's my final thought is that tends to be associated with some of the poorest outcomes. Okay. Okay, so there'll be a test, like one of these like quizzes, like if you were in the class last term, I'm gonna have, and this is all gonna, I shouldn't make an announcement here this deep in the presentation that people are gonna take a while to see, but like I'll be coming out soon with all the course info, and you'll see that the evaluations are set up sort of similar to last term, and that there'll be these chapter quizzes. So if anyone's new, basically what I'm gonna be doing here is just a quick review of some of the key points, right? Just to kind of as a little bit of, yeah, quiz prep review. This idea that identity is a self-portrait composed of many pieces, and I sort of ranted about that, and we talked a lot about that. Identity versus identity confusion is Erikson's fifth stage of human development, of the human, his psychosocial model, and this occurs during adolescence and early adulthood. We talked about James Marcia and the four identity statuses, right? Identity, diffusion, foreclosure, moratorium, and achievement that are based on this idea of crisis and commitment, and we talked about which ones had both. See that increasingly experts argue that a lot of the changes in identity that we experience are shifting. Like it's almost better to use this idea of emerging adulthood than just strictly adolescence, which is sort of like how throughout the presentation I've been making this point about how these ideas are like relevant to a lot of what I'm assuming a lot of your ages are of in the kind of more, I know that there's probably a range. I don't have stats on your age, but I'm going to assume it's like a lot of you are in the earlier 20s, right? So yeah, and ethnicity has an influence on identity. We talked about how sort of acculturating into a new culture can be different based on age, and it's largely influenced by like if you're at school, right? It's like, and the flip is true too. If I was to move to a country that I didn't speak the language, the fastest way to learn the language would be if I was a kid going to school, being surrounded by other kids, hanging out all day, talking in that language around me, because that's how the human brain learns. Like that's like an immersion approach to learning a language, right? So it's like, yeah, so that's what I was sort of talking about with that point. Okay, I should put these all on so that because if I leave one on, then it like kind of messes it up. Like if I only click to 7 and then I do my rant and then I like end the recording, but there's an 8, it like makes it all weird. A key aspect of the managerial role of parenting in adolescence is this idea of monitoring, right? And we talked about it. The adolescent push for autonomy or to be their own person. One of the hallmarks. I'm all like hunched over. I gotta get better posture for this class. It's a little straighter. I just caught a view of myself in the camera. Right, this idea that like the better the attachment to parents. See, this is interesting. I don't know if I directly said this, but I'll say it here. It's like that those same attachment bonds are still important, right? And it's like the attachment strength still has kind of is linked to social competence in the teen years. Parent-adolescent conflict tends to increase in adolescence. The conflict's usually moderate rather than severe, right? So it tends to increase in frequency and even in intensity, but some of it's like par for the course. Some of it's like kind of what happens because the teenager's in a way more intense life situation. Harry Stack Sullivan. So Harry Stack Sullivan's an interesting guy. It's interesting that I name him by name in the review because you're not going to be asked for his name in the test. I don't even think I named him in the presentation, but I think when I was talking about the importance of peer relationships, I was using some of his stuff. Maybe I did actually use his name. But yeah, Harry Stack Sullivan, he's actually a person that I might return back to that name at some point. He's one of those interesting people that sort of yeah, I could do a project on him for sure. I could probably do a whole lecture on him. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay. Peer conformity in cliques and crowds, more importance in adolescence. Talked about that. Talked about like the kind of stages in adolescent dating. Adolescent development is different across cultures. This idea of rites of passage, or the textbook talked about it a bit. I didn't talk about it much, but just this idea that a lot of cultures around the world will have rites of passage that sort of mark the transition from adolescence to adulthood. And you could look at it in North America maybe as being like high school graduation as being one, maybe getting married or moving away. But like historically, a rite of passage is like some kind of, whether it's a test of strength in a lot of ancient societies, or whether it's some kind of achievement that now you're a man or now you're a woman. These rites of passage are common amongst cultures, and rather than necessarily worrying about the specifics about what they are, it's interesting because it shows that people around the world forever have noticed that the teen years are different than other time periods, and it marks this major transition from kid to adult. Okay. There's been a dramatic increase in adolescence media, multitasking, use of internet for social connections. This whole oh man, I'm going to talk about this way more actually at some point, about just the algorithms that allow for people to comment on our stuff and tell that they like us or don't, right? So like anything where it's a social media where you're sharing and people are liking or commenting, it's like, it'd be interesting to really spend some time talking about how that actually affects your psychology and how you actually have evolved as a human being that has never cared about what huge groups of people care about you, especially people you'll never meet and don't know, and that probably maybe wouldn't even like, right? Your brain's not evolved for that. Of course that would make people anxious. The risk taking that increases during adolescence and can be attributed to this different development in the incentive processing, right? So this idea I was saying about like, well, I'm like, my friends are here, so I'm incentivized to like look cool. I'm processing that differently versus my cognitive control system or my brakes or my weighing of the consequences. Bullying emerges during childhood and continues throughout adolescence, and and nowadays cyberbullying even is especially harmful, right? Because at least schoolyard bullying, you left the school for part of the day. It could be escaped to at least some degree. Adolescents have a higher rate of depression than children. Females have higher rates of depression than males. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in Canadians aged 10 to 19. Researchers are increasingly finding that problematic behaviors in adolescence are often interrelated, right? Like, it's like, sometimes you almost like shake your head that you're like this. It's weird that people would even think you. It's great that they're studying the interconnection between these things, but it's like at a certain point it's like super obvious. Like obviously these like self-esteem issues and bullying issues and social media issues, like obviously those things are interrelated. All right. that's it for today. Hope you're doing well. Hope that wasn't too bad, and thanks for watching. You know, Nipissing's got I got a soft spot for Nipissing. I like Nipissing students. You're good people, and I'm gonna try to make these presentations. I hope they're decent, right? It's like I can't script the whole thing. What I think I can do best, or to my best, is like prepare the presentation and then try to like reflect on it with you and try to make it, as understandable as possible, because a lot of you are wanting to be sort of the next generation of my kids' generation, the next generation, I might say, the next generation of teachers of my kids' generation, right? How you understand what these topics matters, right? Because I could look at this class from a really interesting angle of, I'm not from the cities you're from, but I also kind of, when I'm teaching this class, have the ear of like whatever 70 of you or 80 of you future teachers, a lot of you. It's like the more people respond to how they're seen. It's like so much of these psychology ideas are applied or applicable, right? And I'm going to try to focus this course on a little bit more on that, like functional psychology, on like psychology ideas that can make both us stronger as the helpers or the teachers, and help maybe heal the people we're working with, and at times ourselves. All right, hope that was a decent first lecture. And if you're new to the course and you want to send me an email saying who you are, or if you're from the other course, you want to tell me about your holiday or whatever, it's like, I love the random emails too once in a while, but because it's like, and if you have questions, you can email me too, but you're good people, and yeah, more coming soon. This is my awkward conclusion slide. Cheers.